The animals around you feel familiar in size. A penguin stands knee-high. A sloth hangs quietly from a branch. A beaver slips beneath the water and disappears. But this has not always been their size. There were penguins nearly 6 feet tall, diving through ancient seas. There were sloths as heavy as elephants, moving across open landscapes. There were snakes longer than a school bus, beavers the size of bears, insects with wings wider than your forearm. These are not legends. Their bones are measured, their teeth are catalogued, their footprints are pressed into stone, and many of them belong to the same evolutionary families as animals still alive today. The world once supported far more weight. Something allowed size to flourish. Something later made it costly. Across different continents and different eras, giants became smaller descendants, not extinct entirely, just reduced. Why? Why would evolution repeatedly produce enormous bodies, only to favor smaller ones later? What changed in the balance of air, climate, energy, or survival? And if the world once supported giants, could it ever do so again? Tonight, we will follow the bones, the measurements, and the living descendants to glimpse a planet that once carried far more weight. But before we begin, if you're already enjoying this calm space, it would mean so much if you gave this video a gentle like, maybe even subscribed, if you'd like more sleepy science stories like this. And if you feel comfortable sharing, let me know in the comments. Where are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far across the world these gentle science stories travel. So now, take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and let's begin. In museum storage rooms and quiet field tents, the word giant is used with care. It does not describe spectacle alone, nor height rising against a skyline. It refers to mass, to the total weight a body carries through muscle, bone, and tissue. Scientists often use the term megafauna for animals whose size places them far beyond the ordinary range of their ecosystems. The definition shifts slightly across disciplines, yet the idea remains steady. These were creatures whose bodies demanded enormous amounts of energy, space, and structural support simply to exist. Height can mislead the eye. A tall, slender animal may appear imposing, yet weigh far less than a lower, denser one. Body mass determines how much food must be consumed, how heat is retained, how quickly muscles tire, and how slowly a heart must beat to circulate blood through vast distances of living tissue. Mass shapes gravity's constant pull on bone and tendon. It governs the architecture of an entire frame. Fossils preserve this architecture in subtle ways. A femur thick as a pillar reveals the loads it once bore. The curvature of a rib cage suggests lung capacity. Vertebrae widen to distribute strain. Paleontologists measure cross-sectional bone geometry, estimating the stresses those bones once absorbed with each step. Even a fragment can whisper proportion when compared with modern relatives. Footprints offer their own quiet testimony. Pressed into ancient mud, hardened over time, they record depth and spread. The deeper the impression, the greater the transferred weight, adjusted for the softness of sediment long vanished. A sequence of tracks reveals stride length and gait, hinting at how such mass moved across plains or wetlands. Stone becomes a slow memory of pressure. Teeth endure when softer parts dissolve. Their size and wear patterns indicate diet, which in turn supports estimates of body volume and daily caloric need. Broad grinding surfaces suggest the processing of vast quantities of vegetation. Serrated edges imply muscle powerful enough to subdue prey, equal in scale. Jaw hinges enlarge to anchor muscles capable of tremendous force. Size alters biology from the inside outward. Larger bodies lose heat more slowly, often live longer, and reproduce at a measured pace. Growth requires extended development, and offspring are fewer but heavily invested in. Metabolism scales with mass, not in simple proportion, but in predictable relationships that allow scientists to infer breathing rates and energy turnover from fossilized remains. When lineages later diminish in scale, the change follows pressures written in climate, resources, and competition. Shrinking reflects shifting balances in energy efficiency and survival strategy. It is not an accident scattered randomly across time. It is a response shaped by physics and ecology, recorded in bone thickness and tooth enamel. With these principles in place, the outlines of former titans become clearer, and the quiet logic behind their dimensions begins to emerge. Long before modern coastlines settled into their familiar shapes, heavy bodies once stepped across southern shores, where gentle surf met volcanic stone. Among them moved penguins that would feel startling beside their smaller descendants, birds whose heads rose near the height of a grown human, their torsos broad and dense, their flippers thick as carved oars. In the quiet aftermath of the great extinction that ended the age of non avian dinosaurs, seas warmed and ecosystems lay open, and within that openness, certain lineages expanded into remarkable scale. One of the earliest known of these was Kumimanu, a name drawn from the language of Aotearoa, its fossilized bones uncovered in layers of Paleocene rock. From fragments of leg and wing, paleontologists reconstructed a bird of astonishing mass, its femur robust, its humerus built for powerful strokes through water rather than air. These penguins were not merely tall, but heavy, carrying weight that pressed confidently against gravity while transforming that mass into momentum beneath the surface. Large size granted distinct advantages in warm ancient oceans. Greater body mass conserved heat during extended dives, even when surrounding waters cooled with depth. A substantial oxygen store within blood and muscle allowed longer descents, and thicker bones reduced buoyancy, easing the effort of reaching darker, prey-rich layers. In a marine world still reorganizing after catastrophe, competition from fast-swimming mammals had not yet intensified. Fish and squid occupied open niches, and the absence of certain predators permitted slower, deliberate giants to flourish. Their skeletons reveal this life in detail. Dense limb bones limited unwanted lift, while elongated beaks suggested a diet of slippery prey. Muscle attachment scars indicate powerful strokes, each movement sending a broad body forward with steady force. The shoreline impressions of their era are sparse, yet the architecture of their frames speaks clearly of patient endurance rather than speed. Over millions of years, the oceans transformed again. Marine mammals diversified and spread, adding new pressures to coastal waters. Cooler global climates altered currents and prey distribution. In such shifting conditions, smaller bodies required fewer resources and matured more quickly. Reduced mass demanded less daily intake and allowed greater agility in crowded ecosystems. Descendants retain the essential blueprint of their ancestors, the tuxedo pattern, the upright gait, the wing-turned flipper, yet scaled down to match a world increasingly efficient rather than expansive. The towering forms faded gradually from southern beaches, not erased in sudden collapse but adjusted across generations. What remains are stones etched with structure, measurements translated into living proportion, and the enduring presence of modern penguins whose compact frames still echo a time when their lineage moved through warmer seas with a weight that reshaped the water around them. Across broad grasslands and open woodlands of the ancient Americas, the ground once trembled beneath creatures that moved with deliberate steadiness, their bodies vast and furred, their shadows stretching long in the low sun. These were ground sloths, relatives of the small tree dwellers known today, yet shaped on an entirely different scale. Among them stood Megatherium, a mammal whose mass rivaled that of modern elephants, its torso barrel-shaped, its limbs columnar, its presence heavy and unhurried. Megatherium rose upright when needed, balancing on powerful hind legs and a thick tail that formed a living tripod. In this posture, it could reach branches high above its head, drawing foliage down with forelimbs armed in immense, curved claws. These claws were not delicate hooks for hanging. They were formidable tools, built for tearing vegetation and defending a body that, despite its size, lacked speed. Bone structure reveals this strength clearly. The attachment points for muscle along the humerus and femur suggest immense force, each movement grounded in weight and leverage rather than swiftness. For millions of years, these giants inhabited South and later North America, crossing land bridges as continents shifted and climates cooled. They endured repeated glacial cycles, their large bodies conserving heat efficiently across colder intervals. Dense fur and substantial fat stores further insulated them, while a slow metabolism allowed survival in seasons when vegetation thinned. Their teeth, simple and ever-growing, were suited to grinding coarse plants, enabling them to process large volumes of fibrous material without the shearing edges seen in predators. The ecosystems they occupied adjusted around their bulk. As they fed, they reshaped vegetation patterns, trampling saplings and dispersing seeds through digestion. Their movement carved subtle paths through undergrowth, influencing the structure of entire landscapes. To exist at such mass required abundant plant life and stable territory, conditions that persisted through much of the Pleistocene. Toward the end of the last ice age, patterns shifted. Glaciers retreated, habitats reorganized, and new pressures appeared. Archaeological evidence places humans in the Americas during the period when ground sloth fossils grow scarce. Cut marks on bones and the timing of disappearances suggest that hunting, combined with climatic change, narrowed the margin of survival for animals that reproduced slowly and required extensive ranges. Large bodies that once conferred resilience now demanded more resources than altered environments could reliably supply. The lineage did not vanish entirely. In tropical forests, smaller arboreal sloths endured, their bodies light enough to move through branches, their energy needs modest compared to their colossal kin. They hang today in quiet canopies, their curved claws adapted for gripping bark rather than uprooting shrubs. Within their gentle movements rests an echo of a continent once shared with giants, a memory written not in towering stature, but in ancestry carried forward at a more delicate scale. In the humid lowlands of an ancient South America, beneath a canopy thick with broad leaves and heavy air, a body once moved through river shallows with uncoiled patience. It left no towering footprint, no thunder of steps, only a slow parting of water and reeds. Titanoboa, a serpent of extraordinary length, inhabited these equatorial wetlands during the Paleocene, not long after the extinction that reshaped life across the planet. Its vertebrae, discovered in coal deposits formed from dense tropical forests, tell of a reptile extending longer than a modern city bus, its mass distributed in powerful, overlapping coils. Unlike mammals that generate internal heat, Titanoboa relied on the warmth of its surroundings. As an ectotherm, its metabolism and muscular strength were bound to ambient temperature. To sustain a body of such scale, the climate around it must have been consistently warm, far warmer than most tropical regions today. Paleoclimate models and isotopic analysis of ancient sediments suggest average annual temperatures several degrees higher than the present, with minimal seasonal cooling. In that greenhouse world, Rivers ran sluggish, and forests grew dense, trapping humidity near the ground. The anatomy of Titanoboa reflects both constraint and possibility. Each vertebra was thick and heavy, supporting immense muscles required to constrict prey. The skull, inferred from related species and partial remains, would have opened wide to engulf large fish and perhaps crocodilian reptiles that shared its habitat. In water, buoyancy reduced the burden of gravity, allowing greater length without collapse under its own weight. Along muddy banks, that same mass would have pressed deeply into saturated soil, though such impressions rarely endure the passage of deep time. Body size in snakes scales predictably with environmental temperature because digestion, growth rate, and muscle performance depend on heat. Warmer climates permit faster processing of meals and more rapid tissue repair. In cooler air, a reptile of extreme size would struggle to maintain sufficient activity. Titanoboa therefore stands as a living thermometer of its era. Its dimensions encoded evidence of atmospheric and oceanic warmth. As millions of years passed, global climates trended cooler and ecosystems reorganized. The immense advantage conferred by sheer length diminished in a world where temperature fluctuated more widely. Modern boas and pythons, though still impressive, reach only a fraction of Titanoboa's scale. Their physiology remains linked to warmth, yet constrained by limits imposed by cooler averages and changing habitats. From coal-rich sediments and scattered vertebrae emerges not only the outline of a colossal snake, but a portrait of Earth itself in a hotter chapter. The serpent's vanished bulk becomes a measure of ancient heat, a reminder that size can expand with climate and contract as the air itself loses degrees. Along the margins of ancient lakes and slow-moving rivers, where reeds clustered thickly and glacial meltwater pooled across lowlands, a rodent once moved with surprising heft. Castoroids, the giant beaver of the Pleistocene, inhabited these ice age wetlands, its body stretching longer and weighing far more than the compact engineers familiar today. In outline, it resembled a beaver, yet its scale shifted the balance of the shoreline itself, each step pressing deeply into soft sediment, each movement reshaping grasses along the water's edge. Its skull was broad and heavy, dominated by incisors that curved forward like pale chisels. Unlike modern beavers, whose teeth are adapted for felling trees and constructing intricate dams, Castoroides possessed incisors that were narrower and less suited for cutting hardwood. Wear patterns suggest a diet focused more on aquatic vegetation, stems, and submerged plants. Its molars indicate grinding rather than slicing, consistent with a life spent feeding among marsh growth rather than hauling timber. The wetlands it occupied were expansive, braided with channels, and bordered by glacial lakes that expanded and contracted with shifting ice. Bone proportions reveal a creature built for buoyancy and steady swimming rather than elaborate construction. The tail, though broad, lacked some of the reinforced structure seen in modern beavers that use it for support while gnawing upright. Limb bones were sturdy, yet the overall anatomy hints at a semi-aquatic grazer that relied on abundant plant life rather than architectural skill. In vast Ice Age ecosystems, such size could be sustained. Cooler climates favored larger bodies that conserved internal heat, and extensive wetlands provided steady food across wide territories. As the last glacial period waned, landscapes altered dramatically. Ice sheets retreated, water levels shifted, and vegetative communities reorganized. Wetlands fragmented into smaller pockets. At the same time, human populations spread across North America, introducing new pressures into ecosystems already in transition. A large rodent with slow reproductive cycles and significant food requirements faced narrowing margins. Greater body mass demanded more consistent resources, and in a rapidly changing environment, efficiency became increasingly valuable. Modern beavers, smaller and remarkably adaptable, possess traits that align closely with survival in fluctuating habitats. Their capacity to build dams creates stable ponds, moderating water levels and expanding available territory. Smaller size reduces daily caloric needs and allows quicker maturation. The shift from giant to modest scale reflects more than disappearance. It illustrates recalibration. Energy budgets contracted alongside ecosystems. Casteroides left behind massive incisors and heavy bones, quiet evidence of a shoreline once occupied by a very different engineer. In today's rivers, compact beavers still shape waterways with patient labor, carrying forward lineage without the weight their ancestors once bore. Long before birds stitched the sky with feathers, delicate wings once shimmered above coal swamps in a thicker atmosphere. Among towering lycopsid trees and dense horsetail forests of the Carboniferous, dragonfly relatives traced slow arcs through humid air, their bodies elongated, their wings extended to spans far broader than any insect alive today. Meganeura belonged to this ancient lineage, a predatory flyer whose wings stretched more than 2 feet from tip to tip, each membrane threaded with fine veins that carried strength without weight. The air it moved through was not the same air inhaled now. Geological evidence from trapped bubbles in ancient amber and the chemical signature of sedimentary deposits suggests that oxygen levels during parts of the Carboniferous rose to approximately 30 to 35% of the floc's atmosphere, significantly higher than present concentrations. This shift in atmospheric chemistry altered the limits placed upon arthropod bodies. Insects do not breathe through lungs. Instead, they rely on a network of tracheal tubes that deliver oxygen directly to tissues by diffusion. The efficiency of that system depends on surrounding oxygen concentration. In an oxygen-rich world, diffusion traveled farther and faster through those branching tubes, nourishing larger muscle masses without requiring circulatory pumps like those found in vertebrates. With sufficient oxygen reaching flight muscles, extended wings could beat with strength, allowing a predator like Meganeura to patrol swampy clearings in search of smaller arthropods and early amphibians. Its compound eyes would have detected movement easily against a backdrop of filtered green light beneath towering foliage. Scale in insects is bounded by physics. As body size increases, volume grows more rapidly than surface area, and the diffusion of gases becomes less efficient relative to metabolic demand. In a lower oxygen atmosphere, an oversized insect would struggle to deliver adequate oxygen to deep tissues, especially during energetically expensive flight. Modern dragonflies, impressive though they are, remain constrained by these biochemical realities. Their tracheal systems can sustain only so much mass before internal tissues face deprivation. Atmospheric chemistry, shaped by vast forests that buried carbon and shifted global balances, opened a temporary window during which arthropods achieved dimensions now impossible. When oxygen levels gradually declined, influenced by changes in vegetation and climate, that window narrowed. Large-bodied insects faced diminishing returns as their respiratory systems approached functional limits. Smaller frames proved more compatible with evolving air. Meganeura vanished long before mammals walked upright, yet its imprint lingers in the fossilized wings pressed into shale. The veins etched in stone reflect a time when the sky carried more oxygen, when delicate membranes could widen safely into greater span. The living dragonflies that skim ponds today retain the same essential blueprint, scaled down to match the chemistry of modern air, their ancestry carried on lighter wings within a thinner sky. On a continent long isolated by surrounding seas, evolution followed its own expansive rhythm. Across the open woodlands and semi-arid plains of ancient Australia, herds of enormous marsupials once moved slowly between water sources, their broad backs rising above shrubs and low trees. Among them walked Diprotodon, the largest marsupial known, a plant eater whose mass rivaled that of modern rhinoceroses, yet whose lineage traces directly to the modest wombats that burrow quietly today. Diprotodon carried a deep barrel chest and thick, pillar-like limbs that supported tremendous weight. Its skull was elongated, with two prominent forward-facing incisors that gave the genus its name, meaning two front teeth. These teeth, paired with grinding molars at the rear, were suited to processing tough vegetation, from salt-tolerant shrubs to coarse grasses that spread across Pleistocene Australia. Unlike placental megafauna elsewhere, these giants bore their young in pouches, investing heavily in a small number of offspring over extended periods. Fossil assemblages reveal that Diprotodon traveled in groups, perhaps seeking seasonal waterholes across landscapes shaped by fluctuating rainfall. Growth rings within their teeth suggest lives that unfolded over many years, steady and deliberate. In a continent marked by cycles of drought and abundance, large body mass provided certain advantages. Greater fat reserves buffered against lean seasons, and a low surface area relative to volume helped conserve internal moisture under dry conditions. Their size also granted some protection from predators, such as giant monitor lizards and marsupial lions. Yet the same traits that sustained them during gradual climatic oscillations became vulnerabilities when stress intensified. Toward the close of the Pleistocene, Australia experienced increasing aridity and shifts in vegetation patterns. Charcoal deposits in sediment cores hint at changing fire regimes, possibly linked to both natural climate variability and the arrival of humans. Archaeological evidence places people on the continent during the period when Diprotodon fossils grow scarce. Large animals with slow reproductive cycles struggle to recover from sustained hunting pressure, especially when combined with habitat contraction. Modern wombats, compact and burrowing, share skeletal characteristics with their enormous relatives. The shape of the jaw, the structure of continuously growing incisors, and aspects of limb articulation reveal common ancestry. Scaled-down bodies require less forage and mature more quickly, traits better aligned with unpredictable environments and human-altered landscapes. Adaptation did not erase the past, but reshaped it into a smaller frame. Across Australia's ancient lake beds, heavy bones once rested where colossal marsupials fell. Today, smaller wombats emerge at dusk from earthen tunnels, grazing quietly beneath southern stars. In their sturdy forms remains the memory of a continent that once carried marsupial titans, creatures whose mass matched the vastness of the land itself. In the pale light of glacial dawn, across open steppe that stretched between retreating walls of ice, silhouettes once moved with quiet elegance. Their bodies were lean, almost delicate in proportion, yet above each skull rose a vast crown of bone that seemed to defy balance. The Irish elk, known to science as megaloceros, carried antlers that extended outward in sweeping arcs, spanning nearly 12 feet from tip to tip, each beam branching into intricate palms broad as tabletops. These antlers were not simple ornaments. They were living structures, grown and shed each year, demanding extraordinary resources. During the growth season, Blood vessels pulsed through velvet-covered bone, delivering calcium and phosphorus drawn from the animal's skeleton and diet. To build such expansive frameworks required access to mineral-rich forage across grasslands and parklands shaped by Ice Age climates. The weight of these antlers, though proportionate to the body, added a dramatic visual scale that far exceeded most modern deer. Sexual selection played a powerful role in shaping this grandeur. Larger antlers signaled health, strength, and genetic fitness to potential mates. In open habitats where visibility stretched across wide plains, exaggerated structures could be assessed from a distance. Over generations, preference amplified size, and natural variation drifted toward ever broader spans. The skeleton of the Irish elk adapted accordingly. Cervical vertebrae thickened to support the load, and shoulder girdles strengthened to counterbalance the forward pull of bone. Yet magnificence carried cost. Nutritional demands increased in proportion to ornament. During years when vegetation flourished, expansive antlers could be rebuilt without depleting reserves. During colder intervals or periods of ecological instability, the same biological commitment became precarious. Pollen records and sediment cores reveal shifting plant communities toward the end of the last glacial period, as forests began to replace open steppe in many regions. Woodlands constrained movement and reduced the advantage of wide, display-oriented antlers. Dense trees turned sweeping arcs into hindrance. At the same time, human populations expanded across Eurasia. Though evidence for direct overhunting remains debated, archaeological associations indicate temporal overlap. A species with specialized habitat needs and significant mineral requirements faced narrowing corridors of suitable land. Large antlers, once a symbol of success, may have magnified vulnerability when landscapes transformed. When the Irish elk disappeared, it left behind skulls crowned in fossilized splendor, preserved in peat bogs and cave sediments. Modern deer retain the same fundamental design, shedding and regrowing antlers in seasonal rhythm, yet their spans are modest in comparison. The lineage persists, scaled to mixed forests and patchwork fields, its extravagance moderated by ecological balance. The steppe that nurtured those immense crowns has long since shifted beneath forest and farmland. With the memory of such scale now established, the view broadens beyond single species, toward the forces that shaped size itself across continents and climates. Cold alters the mathematics of flesh. When temperatures fall and winds move unhindered across open ground, survival begins to hinge on how a body holds its warmth. In such climates, mass becomes more than presence. It becomes insulation, stored energy, a buffer against the long subtraction of heat. Heat escapes across surface area, while it is generated within volume. As animals increase in size, their volume grows more quickly than their surface, allowing large bodies to conserve internal warmth with greater efficiency than smaller ones. This principle, observed across mammals and birds alike, shapes patterns seen in colder regions where related species often trend larger than their counterparts in warmer zones. The ratio between skin exposed to air and tissue producing heat favors bulk in frigid landscapes. Ice Age environments magnified this advantage. Across glacial steppes and tundra, winters stretched long and vegetation thinned beneath frost. Larger animals could maintain stable internal temperatures with less relative energy loss. Thick layers of fat added further insulation, trapping heat close to muscle and organ. Adipose tissue also served as a reservoir, storing calories gathered during brief summers for use when snow-covered grazing grounds. In a world of seasonal scarcity, Stored fuel meant endurance. Metabolism adjusts with scale. Larger mammals generally exhibit slower heart rates and reduced mass-specific metabolic rates compared to smaller ones. Their bodies burn energy more gradually, stretching reserves across extended periods. This does not mean they require little food, but rather that each unit of tissue demands less energy than in a smaller creature whose higher metabolic pace drives constant intake. In stable cold ecosystems, where forage was predictable across vast ranges, such efficiency balanced sizes costs. Skeletal structure reflects this adaptation. Stockier limbs, compact extremities, and shortened ears minimize exposed surfaces where heat could dissipate. Fur thickens, and beneath it, circulation shifts to preserve core temperature. Even behavioral patterns align with mass. Larger herbivores migrate in search of grazing grounds, their bodies capable of traveling long distances without rapid depletion. Predators that hunted them often increased in size as well, sustained by calorically dense prey. Yet this advantage depends on environmental consistency. When cold persists across generations, natural selection gradually favors individuals whose proportions retain warmth most effectively. Over time, lineages trend toward greater mass, not from ambition, but from arithmetic shaped by climate. Ice ages rewarded heft not as spectacle, but as practicality. In sweeping cold where energy slipped away with every gust, a larger body held onto heat just long enough to see another dawn, carrying within it the quiet logic of survival written in weight and warmth. Warmth carries its own arithmetic, subtler than frost, yet no less decisive. As temperatures rise across decades and centuries, bodies respond in ways that seem gradual at first, almost imperceptible, then measurable in bone length, wingspan, and average mass. In museum drawers and long-running field studies, scientists have begun to notice a quiet pattern. In several species of birds, mammals, and fish, individuals today are slightly smaller than their predecessors from cooler decades, their proportions shifting in step with a warming world. Heat places stress on tissue. Larger bodies retain warmth efficiently, a benefit in cold eras. Yet in higher temperatures, that same efficiency becomes burden. Excess internal heat must be dissipated to prevent physiological strain. Smaller bodies, with greater surface area relative to volume, shed heat more readily. Blood moves closer to skin, and evaporation assists cooling. Across generations exposed to increasing warmth, individuals whose proportions allow quicker heat loss may hold subtle advantages. Food webs also recalibrate under warming climates. Changes in precipitation, shifts in plant growth, and altered ocean currents influence the availability and nutritional quality of resources. When drought narrows grazing grounds or marine productivity fluctuates, large animals face higher energetic costs simply to maintain mass. Smaller bodies require fewer calories each day, reducing dependence on abundant forage. In unstable environments, energy efficiency becomes a quiet ally. Documented examples span continents. Certain alpine mammals have shown reduced average body size as snow seasons shorten. Some migratory birds exhibit shorter wings and lighter mass, correlating with warmer breeding grounds. Marine species in warming waters often mature at smaller sizes, a trend observed in fish populations where temperature directly influences metabolic rate and growth patterns. These shifts do not occur uniformly, and not every species follows the same trajectory. Yet the pattern appears frequently enough to suggest a broader principle at work. Reproductive timing intertwines with size. Smaller animals generally reach maturity more quickly and reproduce sooner. In environments that fluctuate rapidly, Earlier reproduction can secure genetic continuity before conditions change again. Shorter generation times allow natural selection to act with greater speed, fine-tuning populations to current climates. Larger species, with longer developmental periods and fewer offspring, adapt more slowly under sudden warming. None of these adjustments happen overnight. They unfold across decades and centuries, guided by incremental differences in survival and fertility. Bones collected from different eras record these changes with quiet clarity, revealing trends that mirror shifting temperatures. As the climate warms, the balance that once favored mass in cold landscapes tilts toward compact efficiency. Size, long shaped by ice and abundance, yields again to the prevailing air, narrowing in proportion to the heat that now lingers longer each year. Air is invisible, yet it sets boundaries as surely as bone or gravity. The mixture of gases that surrounds the planet has shifted many times across deep history, and with each shift, the possibilities for size have changed. In earlier chapters of Earth's story, elevated oxygen concentrations allowed certain lineages to stretch beyond proportions that seem attainable now. The delicate wings pressed into ancient stone were sustained by chemistry as much as by muscle. Oxygen fuels metabolism. In animals, it drives the cellular processes that release energy from food, supporting growth, movement, and repair. The way oxygen travels from atmosphere to tissue differs among groups, and these differences shape upper limits of body size. Insects rely on a tracheal system, a network of branching tubes that open directly to the outside through small spiracles. Oxygen diffuses inward along concentration gradients, reaching cells without the assistance of a closed circulatory pump. This system functions efficiently at small scales, yet diffusion becomes less effective over greater distances. When atmospheric oxygen levels rise, the gradient strengthens, allowing molecules to travel farther through tracheal tubes. In such conditions, larger bodies can be sustained because tissues deep within receive adequate supply. As oxygen concentrations decline, diffusion distances shorten, and the maximum feasible body size contracts. The respiratory architecture that once supported expansive frames becomes a limiting factor under thinner air. Mammals and birds employ a different strategy. They possess lungs connected to circulatory systems that actively transport oxygen bound to hemoglobin within blood. This mechanism can deliver oxygen more forcefully to internal tissues, reducing reliance on simple diffusion across long distances. As a result, fluctuations in atmospheric oxygen exert less direct constraint on their maximum size compared with insects. Body mass in mammals is shaped more strongly by energy availability, climate, and biomechanical limits than by oxygen diffusion alone. Still, oxygen levels influence all aerobic life. Periods of relative hypoxia, when oxygen content decreases, can impose stress on large vertebrates as well, particularly in high altitude or warming marine environments where dissolved oxygen drops. Yet the structural advantage of lungs and efficient circulation grants vertebrates greater flexibility within changing air. The composition of the atmosphere emerges as a quiet architect. Forest expansion, burial of organic carbon, volcanic outgassing, and tectonic cycles all adjust the balance of gases over geological timescales. Each alteration subtly redraws the contours within which bodies evolve. Insects expanded dramatically when oxygen peaked. Mammals rose to dominance under different chemical conditions. Within the present atmosphere, its proportions familiar and steady, life occupies a range tuned to contemporary chemistry. Size remains possible, but always in negotiation with the air itself, whose unseen percentages continue to frame the living boundaries of mass and motion. Weight is not only carried in bone and muscle, it is carried in calories. Every heartbeat, every step across grass or sand is paid for in energy drawn from the surrounding world. As bodies enlarge, their total demand rises accordingly. A massive herbivore must consume vast quantities of vegetation each day to sustain tissue, maintain temperature, and support growth. A large predator, in turn, must secure prey substantial enough to justify the effort of pursuit. The arithmetic of mass rests on a foundation of constant intake. Ecosystems possess a finite carrying capacity, a limit defined by sunlight, rainfall, soil nutrients, and the efficiency with which plants convert energy through photosynthesis. From that primary production flows the energy available to herbivores, and from them to carnivores. At each transfer, losses occur. Only a fraction of plant energy becomes flesh. Only a fraction of herbivore biomass sustains predators. The larger an animal grows, the narrower the margin between adequate nourishment and deficit. In periods of stability, when climate and vegetation remain relatively predictable across generations, large bodies can thrive. Abundant grasslands may support extensive herds. Productive oceans can sustain immense marine life. Over time, natural selection favors those individuals capable of reaching greater size if resources remain reliable. Bones thicken, digestive tracts expand, and migration routes stretch across continents to track seasonal abundance. Instability shifts this balance. Drought reduces forage density, floods alter habitat boundaries, temperature fluctuations reshape growing seasons. When productivity declines even slightly, large animals feel the impact swiftly because their daily requirements leave little room for scarcity. Fat reserves can buffer short shortages, yet prolonged disruption erodes that cushion. Smaller species, with lower caloric demands and often broader diets, navigate lean intervals with greater flexibility. Reproductive pace compounds this challenge. Many large animals mature slowly and produce few offspring at a time, investing years in parental care. During ecological upheaval, population recovery hinges on the survival of limited young. If adults perish before reproducing, numbers decline rapidly and rebound slowly. In contrast, smaller species frequently reproduce earlier and in greater quantity, allowing quicker adjustment to changing conditions. The cost of being massive is therefore not merely structural, it is metabolic and demographic. To maintain great size requires a continuous, predictable flow of energy through the ecosystem. When that flow falters, bulk becomes burden rather than advantage. Across deep time, episodes of environmental instability have repeatedly narrowed the space within which giants can persist. In calmer eras, mass expands once more, fed by generous landscapes. In unsettled chapters, the ledger shifts, and efficiency outweighs magnitude, guiding evolution toward forms that consume less and recover faster within an uncertain world. Long after ice had advanced and retreated across continents, another presence began to move quietly into established ecosystems. Small groups of humans crossed land bridges, followed coastlines, and entered regions that for hundreds of thousands of years had been shaped without them. Their arrival did not resemble a storm or a sudden cataclysm. It was gradual, step by step, generation by generation. Yet in the archaeological record, their spread often aligns with a pattern that repeats across distant lands. In Australia, the Americas, and many oceanic islands, large animals vanish from fossil sequences not long after evidence of human settlement appears. Bones of massive herbivores grow scarce within layers that coincide with stone tools and hearth remains. The timing varies by region, yet the correlation emerges with striking consistency. Species that had endured glacial cycles and shifting vegetation disappear within a comparatively narrow window after human arrival. Hunting pressure forms one plausible mechanism. Early humans, though few in number, possessed cooperation, planning, and tools capable of inflicting lethal force at a distance. Even modest levels of sustained hunting can disproportionately affect large animals. Many megafaunal species matured slowly and produced limited offspring. Removing adult individuals before they reproduced reduced population resilience. Over generations, such losses accumulate. Archaeological sites reveal cut marks on bones, embedded spear points, and accumulations of butchered remains. These traces indicate that some giant mammals were consumed, though the scale of exploitation remains debated. Certain regions lack clear kill sites, suggesting that direct hunting may not fully explain every extinction. Climate fluctuations were already reshaping habitats as humans expanded, altering plant distributions and water availability. In some cases, fire regimes changed as people modified landscapes to encourage particular vegetation. The scientific discussion continues with nuance. Some researchers emphasize climatic stress as the dominant factor, pointing to pollen records and sediment cores that document rapid environmental change. Others highlight the speed with which extinctions follow human colonization, especially on islands where climate remained relatively stable yet large fauna vanished swiftly. Increasingly, evidence suggests interaction rather than single cause. Climate may have weakened populations, while human pressure delivered a final reduction that tipped species beyond recovery. The pattern does not imply deliberate eradication or uniform impact across all regions. Many large species survived alongside humans for extended periods, adapting to coexistence. Yet across multiple continents, the overlap between migration routes and megafaunal decline stands as a recurring motif in deep time. Human arrival becomes part of the broader story of size, not as solitary agent but as additional force within complex systems. Where giants once dominated open plains and woodlands, their disappearance often traces the subtle yet persistent footprint of a new and adaptable predator entering the ancient balance of Earth. Time flows differently inside a large body. Growth unfolds slowly, bones lengthening over many seasons before strength fully settles into muscle and frame. In the great mammals of the past, maturity often required years of careful survival. Gestation lasted long, and the number of young brought forth at once was small. Each offspring represented a considerable investment of energy, protection, and learning, carried within the rhythm of extended parental care. This strategy evolved under conditions of relative stability, when landscapes remained predictable and food sources dependable. Producing fewer young with greater investment increased the chances that each would reach adulthood. Large brains, complex social bonds, and prolonged development all demanded time. The reward was resilience in steady environments, where survival rates remained high and generations overlapped with continuity. Yet, such a life history carries inherent fragility. When climates shift rapidly or habitats fracture, the pace of reproduction becomes critical. Species that produce many offspring quickly can respond within a few generations to new pressures. Genetic variation spreads more rapidly through populations that turn over fast. In contrast, animals that bear only a handful of young across extended lifespans recover slowly from losses. A single harsh decade can remove a substantial portion of breeding adults, and replacement may require many years. In large herbivores, intervals between births can span several seasons. Juveniles depend on maternal nourishment and guidance, limiting the mother's ability to conceive again while care continues. Predators of great size face similar constraints, with small litters and prolonged dependency. Under stable conditions, these patterns maintain balanced populations. During abrupt environmental disruption, they hinder recovery. Consider an ecosystem confronted by drought, cooling, warming, or new competitors. If mortality rises among adults before they reproduce, population decline accelerates. With few young entering the population each year, numbers dwindle even if some individuals survive. The mathematics of low birth rates amplifies vulnerability when external pressures increase. This dynamic becomes especially pronounced when combined with other stresses. Large body size already demands abundant energy. If resources falter and adults weaken, fewer pregnancies succeed. Offspring that are born must still navigate altered landscapes with reduced protection. Gradual pressures compound through time. Smaller species often carry opposite traits. Rapid maturation, frequent reproduction, and larger litters allow swift population rebounds. Their shorter generational spans create flexibility across fluctuating conditions. Evolution does not assign superiority to either strategy. It aligns life histories with prevailing environments. Across deep history, slow reproduction has proven advantageous in calm eras and hazardous in sudden change. The giants that once shaped continents bore the weight not only of their mass, but of time itself, each generation unfolding slowly, exquisitely tuned to stability that could not always be preserved. Isolation reshapes bodies with quiet persistence. When a lineage becomes confined to an island, surrounded by water that limits migration and competition, evolution begins to operate within tighter boundaries. Space is finite. Predators may be absent, and resources arrive only through what the land itself can produce. In such contained worlds, size often shifts in unexpected directions, expanding in some species and contracting in others. On islands of Indonesia, the Komodo dragon grows to lengths far exceeding those of its mainland relatives. With few large mammalian predators and an ecological role left unclaimed, this reptile rose to the apex position. Abundant prey in the form of introduced ungulates and native species allowed it to sustain a body far larger than most monitor lizards. Slow movement, powerful jaws, and a metabolism attuned to warm climates enabled survival in a habitat where competition for dominance was minimal. Isolation removed certain pressures while intensifying others, guiding growth toward greater scale. Elsewhere, the pattern reversed. On Mediterranean islands during the Pleistocene, elephant species evolved into dramatically smaller forms. Fossil remains from places such as Sicily and Crete reveal elephants no larger than modern cattle, their limbs shortened and bodies compact. These dwarf elephants descended from mainland ancestors that once roamed expansive territories. Upon reaching isolated islands with limited vegetation, selection favored individuals requiring less food. Over generations, smaller bodies consumed fewer resources and reproduced more efficiently within restricted landscapes. This phenomenon, often termed the island rule, reflects how ecological balance shifts under confinement. In environments lacking predators, small species may grow larger because energy can be directed toward growth rather than constant vigilance. Conversely, large species frequently shrink when resources cannot support their caloric demands. Carrying capacity on islands is constrained by area, soil fertility, and freshwater availability. Without migration corridors to supplement shortages, resident populations must adapt internally. Predator absence can also alter behavior and morphology. Reduced fear responses and slower life histories sometimes emerge, yet these traits can render species vulnerable when new predators arrive. Human settlement on many islands introduced hunting and habitat alteration, accelerating extinctions among both island giants and dwarfs. The same isolation that fostered unique size trajectories left these species exposed to rapid change. Island gigantism and dwarfism illustrate how size is neither fixed nor universally advantageous. It responds to the interplay between opportunity and limitation. When space narrows and ecosystems simplify, bodies adjust to match the scale of their surroundings. In contained habitats, evolution works within tighter margins, sculpting forms that mirror the boundaries of the land itself. Across open plains and beneath forest canopies, size rarely evolves in isolation. Every body exists within a web of pursuit and escape, strength and vigilance. When herbivores grow larger, feeding on expansive vegetation and moving in formidable herds, they reshape the opportunities available to carnivores. Muscle answers muscle, and over generations, the proportions of predator and prey begin to mirror one another in a quiet escalation. Large herbivores present both challenge and reward. Their mass demands coordinated hunting strategies and powerful anatomy capable of subduing resistant bodies. Predators that develop greater strength, longer limbs, or enhanced stamina gain access to caloric returns substantial enough to sustain their own increasing size. In such systems, selective pressures travel in both directions. As predators become more capable, prey species may favor larger individuals whose bulk deters attack or enables survival through endurance. Horns lengthen, hooves harden, and group dynamics shift toward collective defense. This reciprocal shaping has unfolded repeatedly across geological epochs. Fossil assemblages reveal intervals during which both herbivores and carnivores trended toward impressive dimensions, their skeletons displaying thickened bones and reinforced joints suited to bearing weight and absorbing impact. Tooth morphology evolves in tandem, with carnivores developing blades suited for cutting through dense muscle, while herbivores refine grinding surfaces to process abundant forage required to sustain mass. Such balance depends upon stable productivity. For predators to maintain large bodies, prey populations must remain abundant and distributed across sufficient territory. Should vegetation decline, herbivores falter first, their energy base reduced. As prey diminishes, large predators confront scarcity. Because their caloric requirements are high and their reproductive rates often slow, they experience steep population contractions when food becomes inconsistent. The collapse of prey size can ripple upward. If herbivore lineages shrink in response to warming, habitat fragmentation, or resource limitation, the optimal body plan for predators shifts accordingly. Smaller prey favors agility over brute force, speed over sheer strength. Carnivores adapt by reducing mass, increasing maneuverability, and adjusting hunting tactics. Over extended periods, entire predator clades may diminish in size as the ecosystem recalibrates. This interplay underscores a central principle. Evolution does not sculpt magnitude in isolation, but in response to surrounding bodies. Large forms thrive when matched by environments capable of sustaining layered hierarchies of consumption. When that foundation weakens, the cascade travels through every trophic level. Across deep time, the arms race between predator and prey has expanded and contracted like a breathing system, inflating under abundance and tightening under strain. Each adjustment leaves its imprint in bone proportions and tooth edges, recording a dialogue written not in words, but in the reciprocal shaping of survival and appetite. There are moments in Earth's history when change does not unfold gradually, but surges forward in sharp pulses. Layers of sediment, ice cores, and fossil pollen reveal episodes when temperatures climbed within a geological heartbeat, altering rainfall patterns and reshaping entire biomes. These intervals of rapid warming, sometimes called climate whiplash events, imposed stresses that even well adapted giants struggled to absorb. When warming accelerates, plant communities often shift faster than long lived animals can track them. Grasses retreat from former ranges, forests advance or wither depending on moisture, and wetlands contract under rising evaporation. A herbivore whose digestive system is specialized for a particular vegetation type may suddenly encounter landscapes where that food grows sparse. Migration can buffer such changes only if corridors remain open and distances manageable. As primary producers falter or relocate, the disturbance travels upward through food webs. Insects dependent on certain plants decline, followed by birds and small mammals that feed on them. Large herbivores, already consuming immense quantities, feel shortages acutely. Reduced body condition lowers reproductive success and weakens immune response. Calves and juveniles prove especially vulnerable in altered climates, where seasonal cues no longer align with peak forage. Predators follow the trajectory of their prey. When herbivore populations fragment or diminish, carnivores experience reduced hunting success. Larger predators, with higher caloric demands and slower reproductive cycles, find it difficult to adapt quickly. A few years of scarcity can translate into lasting demographic decline. Bones buried in such periods often cluster in narrow strata, marking abrupt losses within ecosystems that had previously remained stable for millennia. Rapid warming can also alter aquatic systems. Rising temperatures reduce dissolved oxygen in water, stressing fish and marine invertebrates. Coral reefs bleach and collapse, removing habitat complexity that supports diverse communities. In freshwater environments, altered flow regimes shift nutrient balance and breeding grounds. Such changes cascade through trophic levels, restructuring entire networks of interaction. Unlike gradual climatic trends that allow incremental adaptation, abrupt spikes compress time. Genetic variation may not spread quickly enough to confer resilience before mortality increases. Species with narrow ecological niches, large body size, or slow reproduction face particular risk under swift transitions. The interplay of heat stress, habitat loss, and disrupted food chains compounds vulnerability. Throughout deep time, these rapid episodes have left signatures in extinction patterns and shifts in average body size. Some lineages contract, others migrate, and a few adapt successfully to new conditions. Yet, for many giants, whose existence depended upon stable abundance and predictable climates, sudden warming narrowed the space in which their scale could be sustained. In the quiet layers of rock, climate whiplash remains recorded as a turning point, where momentum outpaced adaptation and the balance of mass shifted once again. Within the spiral of every shell of bone lies a quieter archive than stone can hold. Inside cells, coiled strands of DNA carry the memory of abundance and loss, recording not only lineage, but also the narrowing and widening of possibility through time. When populations shrink abruptly, whether from climate shifts, hunting pressure, or habitat fragmentation, the genetic variation within them contracts as well. This constriction is known as a bottleneck, and its effects can persist long after numbers recover. In a large, stable population, countless genetic combinations circulate through generations. Variation provides resilience. Some individuals carry traits that allow tolerance of drought, resistance to disease, or flexibility in diet. When circumstances change, these differences become lifelines. Yet, if a population declines to only a few hundred or even a few thousand individuals, many genetic variants vanish simply because their carriers do not survive or reproduce. The gene pool tightens. Ancient DNA, extracted from bones preserved in permafrost, caves, and sediments, has begun to illuminate these episodes with remarkable clarity. Sequencing of remains from extinct megafauna reveals patterns of declining heterozygosity preceding disappearance. In some cases, genetic diversity was already low before final extinction, suggesting prolonged stress. Small effective population sizes leave signatures in the genome, stretches of identical sequences that signal inbreeding and limited mate choice. Inbreeding increases the likelihood that harmful mutations become expressed. Traits that would remain recessive in large populations can surface more frequently when closely related individuals breed. Reduced fertility, increased juvenile mortality, and susceptibility to pathogens may follow. For species already challenged by environmental change, such genetic vulnerability compounds external pressures. The process can unfold gradually. A climate shift reduces habitat range. A new predator increases mortality. Human expansion fragments territory into isolated pockets. Each subdivision traps a smaller population with limited exchange between groups. Over time, genetic drift dominates and adaptive potential diminishes. Even if conditions later stabilize, a population that has passed through a severe bottleneck may struggle to regain former robustness. Not all species respond identically. Some maintain surprising resilience despite reduced diversity, while others decline swiftly. Life histories again play a role. Animals with slow reproduction accumulate genetic consequences more slowly, but also recover variation less readily. When a lineage of giants loses both numbers and diversity, its ability to adapt to additional stressors narrows. Beneath the visible story of shrinking bodies lies this subtler narrative of diminished variation. Bones reveal stature, but genomes reveal possibility. In the quiet sequences preserved across millennia, the imprint of bottlenecks reminds us that size alone does not determine survival. The breadth of genetic potential, unseen yet profound, often shapes whether a species endures or fades into absence. Ecosystems rarely remain unoccupied for long. When one lineage flourishes, another eventually emerges with different tools, different physiology, and different strategies for survival. Across deep time, the rise of newcomers has often altered the fortunes of giants who once seemed secure within their niches. Replacement does not always require direct conflict. Sometimes it unfolds quietly through efficiency, speed, or innovation. In ancient southern oceans, large flightless birds once moved with confidence through coastal waters, their dense bones and powerful strokes suited to abundant prey. Over millions of years, however, marine mammals diversified. Early seals, sea lions, and toothed whales entered similar feeding grounds equipped with lungs adapted for extended dives, flexible spines that enabled agile pursuit, and advanced auditory systems that refined hunting beneath the surface. Mammalian metabolisms supported sustained activity across varied temperatures, allowing them to exploit resources year-round. As these marine mammals expanded, overlap increased. Both groups consumed fish and cephalopods, and both relied on accessible shorelines for breeding. Mammals bore live young and offered extended parental care on land or ice, strategies that may have enhanced juvenile survival under changing climatic conditions. Gradually, the competitive balance shifted. The avian giants of earlier epochs diminished, while mammalian predators grew more prominent within coastal ecosystems. A similar pattern unfolded on land long before. After the age of large reptiles waned, mammals diversified rapidly. Endothermy, the internal regulation of temperature, granted mammals flexibility in cooler climates and during nighttime activity. Complex dentition allowed specialized diets, and expanded brain capacity supported social structures and learning. Reptilian dominance, once widespread across terrestrial habitats, gave way to mammalian radiation. This transition did not occur in a single moment, but through prolonged ecological reshuffling. Ecological displacement arises when two lineages depend upon overlapping resources and one holds subtle advantages. These advantages may lie in metabolic efficiency, reproductive timing, sensory acuity, or behavioral adaptability. Even slight differences compound across generations. If a newcomer secures prey more effectively or thrives under variable climates, the incumbent population can decline without dramatic confrontation. Fossil records often reveal staggered patterns where former dominants persist in diminishing ranges while successors expand. Over time, shrinking populations of the earlier lineage face increased vulnerability to additional stresses, including climate shifts and human influence. Size alone cannot defend against gradual replacement when ecological circumstances favor alternative designs. Throughout Earth's history, succession has been a steady theme. Giants arise within opportunity, and newcomers reshape that opportunity through innovation. The narrative of shrinking bodies intertwines with these arrivals, not as simple defeat, but as evidence that dominance depends on context. When conditions change, so too does the architecture best suited to prevail. In the open ocean, gravity loosens its grip. Water supports weight in a way land never can, lifting immense bodies into near suspension and softening the mechanical burden that bone must bear. Within this buoyant realm, evolution found room for scale that terrestrial landscapes would struggle to sustain. Whales, the largest animals ever known, inhabit this floating architecture of physics. Buoyancy changes the rules of mass. On land, skeletons must resist constant compression, joints must absorb impact, and muscles must counterbalance every shift of weight. As bodies enlarge, structural stress increases rapidly. In water, much of that stress dissolves. A whale's spine arches gently through currents, supported by the surrounding medium. Limbs transformed into flippers steer rather than brace, and the immense heart circulates blood without the need to lift weight against gravity in the same manner as terrestrial giants. Energy flows differently through marine systems. Phytoplankton, microscopic yet vast in collective abundance, converts sunlight into organic matter across immense surface areas. These tiny producers form the base of food webs that extend upward through zooplankton, small fish, and ultimately to whales. Baleen whales filter enormous volumes of water, capturing swarms of krill or copepods in efficient gulps. The concentration of plankton in nutrient-rich upwellings provides dense energy packets that can sustain bodies of extraordinary size. Cooling oceans have also played a role. As global temperatures declined over the past tens of millions of years, nutrient circulation intensified in many regions. Colder water holds more dissolved oxygen and supports mixing that brings minerals from deep currents to the surface. Increased productivity likely fueled the expansion of baleen whales, allowing certain lineages to grow progressively larger while maintaining sufficient intake to support their mass. Land imposes different constraints. Terrestrial productivity depends on soil, fertility, rainfall, and growing seasons. Even in expansive grasslands, the energy density available per unit area remains limited compared with the immense three-dimensional foraging range of oceans. A land animal must walk to gather food. A whale swims through a medium that constantly delivers prey within reach. Migration routes across oceans span thousands of miles without the interruption of mountains or deserts that fragment terrestrial habitats. Reproduction in whales remains slow, yet the stability of marine feeding grounds across evolutionary time provided continuity. Large size also enhances long distance travel and thermoregulation in cold seas, reinforcing selection toward magnitude. While many giants on land diminished as climates shifted and ecosystems fragmented, the sea retained conditions favorable to enormity. Supported by buoyancy and sustained by vast blooms of plankton, whales continue to embody a scale that terrestrial worlds seldom maintain. Stand on any continent today, and the horizon feels divided. Forests break into farms, grasslands yield to highways, wetlands narrow beneath cities. The surface of the planet, once stitched together by uninterrupted corridors of migration, now lies partitioned into fragments. Within these divided landscapes, the conditions that once sustained immense terrestrial mass have grown rare. Large land animals require continuity. Their survival depends upon broad territories where food sources shift seasonally yet remain accessible through movement. During the Ice Age, expansive steppes and connected forests allowed herds to travel immense distances without encountering barriers beyond rivers and mountains. In contrast, modern habitat fragmentation interrupts these pathways. Fences, roads, and urban sprawl restrict migration routes, confining populations to smaller pockets of terrain. When forage declines in one area, the option to relocate diminishes. Human pressure compounds this spatial limitation. Beyond direct hunting, agriculture transforms ecosystems at scale. Fields replace diverse plant communities, reducing the variety and abundance of forage available to herbivores. Livestock compete for grasslands that once supported wild megafauna. Even where protective legislation exists, poaching and resource extraction persist. For a species with high caloric needs and slow reproduction, sustained disturbance can outweigh resilience. Climate unpredictability adds further strain. Weather patterns fluctuate more erratically in many regions, bringing intense droughts, unseasonal storms, or shifting rainfall. Large bodies buffer cold effectively, yet extreme heat can impose physiological stress. Water scarcity forces animals to concentrate near dwindling sources, increasing competition and exposure to disease. Unlike in earlier epochs when climatic trends unfolded over extended timescales, rapid and irregular shifts complicate long-term adaptation. Carrying capacity on land has effectively narrowed. Fragmented habitats support fewer individuals, and smaller populations heighten the risk of genetic bottlenecks. Without extensive contiguous ecosystems, even species that once achieved impressive size must function within tighter energetic budgets. Evolutionary responses favor traits compatible with compressed space and variable resources. Reduced body mass demands less daily intake and facilitates coexistence within altered environments. Marine systems continue to sustain giants through buoyancy and vast feeding grounds. Yet, terrestrial systems bear the imprint of intensive human modification. The absence of land animals matching ice age mass does not reflect an inherent loss of evolutionary potential, but a transformation of context. The landscapes that permitted such scale have been reshaped into mosaics where stability and abundance rarely align at continental scope. Across plains and forests, modern megafauna persist, yet their maximum size now reflects a planet intricately shared with a singular, widespread species. In this reconfigured world, the balance of space, energy, and predictability has shifted away from the extremes once etched into Ice Age bone. Measurements taken decades apart can reveal changes too subtle for casual notice. In museum collections, birds gathered in the early 20th century rest beside more recent specimens of the same species. When researchers align their wings and compare bone length, faint differences emerge. On average, some modern individuals are lighter, their bodies slightly reduced, compared with ancestors preserved in drawers lined with cotton and paper. Field studies echo this pattern. In certain alpine mammals, long-term monitoring has documented gradual declines in body mass correlated with shorter winters and earlier snowmelt. Marine biologists studying fish populations report trends toward earlier maturation at smaller sizes in warming waters. Even some insects exhibit shifts in average dimensions where seasonal temperatures rise. These changes are not universal, yet they appear frequently enough across taxa to attract sustained scientific attention. Rising global temperatures influence growth in multiple ways. Warmer conditions can accelerate metabolic rates, leading to faster development but reduced ultimate size in some species. Heat stress also alters hormonal pathways linked to growth and reproduction. For endotherms, maintaining stable internal temperature in warmer climates demands additional energy for cooling, subtly reshaping how calories are allocated between maintenance and growth. Resource pressures intensify these effects. As habitats fragment and weather patterns grow less predictable, food availability fluctuates. Plants may shift flowering times, disrupting synchrony with pollinators. Drought reduces forage quality, while altered ocean currents influence plankton distribution. In such contexts, individuals that require fewer calories may fare better across variable seasons. Natural selection can therefore favor slightly smaller bodies that maintain energy balance more efficiently. Urbanization introduces further complexity. Heat islands within cities create localized warming, and altered food webs provide novel but inconsistent resources. Some bird species in metropolitan areas have demonstrated reductions in average size compared with rural counterparts, possibly reflecting dietary differences and thermal stress. Yet other urban adapted species display alternative responses, underscoring the nuanced interplay of factors shaping contemporary evolution. Genetic analyses complement these observations. By comparing allele frequencies across generations, scientists detect subtle shifts associated with growth, regulation, and metabolism. Although evolutionary change over short timescales may seem modest, cumulative effects across many species suggest that body size remains responsive to environmental conditions. The present era does not mirror the vast expanses of earlier cold epochs. Instead, it presents a mosaic of warming trends and constrained habitats. Within this setting, size continues to adjust, sometimes contracting by small increments that accrue meaning over time. The story of shrinking does not belong solely to distant ages of mammoths and giant reptiles. It unfolds quietly now, recorded in museum drawers, field notebooks, and genetic code as life recalibrates once more to a changing planet. Not all traces of former magnitude are visible at a glance. Some linger in the curve of a spine, the density of a limb bone, or in genetic sequences that recall dimensions no longer expressed. Modern animals often appear modest beside their prehistoric relatives, yet within their bodies remain structural and molecular echoes of larger ancestors. The skeleton provides one of the clearest connections. When paleontologists compare the limb bones of small living sloths to those of their colossal ground dwelling kin, similarities in joint articulation and muscle attachment emerge. The proportions differ, scaled down to match present mass, yet the blueprint remains consistent. In deer, the seasonal cycle of antler growth reflects ancestral capacities once expanded to extraordinary breadth. Even the compact beaver retains incisors reinforced by iron-rich enamel, a design rooted in a lineage that once included far heavier frames. Genomes carry quieter reminders. Segments of DNA associated with growth regulation, bone density, and metabolic pathways persist across generations. In some species, genes that once enabled substantial body size continue to function, though environmental conditions no longer favor their full expression. Comparative genomics reveals conserved sequences tied to limb development and skeletal expansion, indicating that the potential for greater scale has not entirely vanished, only moderated by selection. Behavior can also preserve ancestral context. Large herbivores that survive today often exhibit migratory instincts shaped in eras when expansive territories were essential. Elephants traverse long distances in search of seasonal resources, following routes that may mirror pathways once shared with even larger megafauna. Predatory strategies, such as cooperative hunting or ambush techniques, evolved within ecosystems where prey dimensions differed, yet the behavioral architecture endures in adjusted form. Physiological traits hint at past conditions as well. Thickened dermal layers, substantial digestive chambers, and slow maturation rates in certain mammals suggest inheritance from ancestors adapted to different climatic regimes. Though bodies have reduced in size, metabolic rhythms sometimes retain the cadence of slower growing giants. These continuities underscore that shrinking does not equate to erasure. Evolution reshapes proportion without discarding foundational design. The same developmental pathways that once built massive limbs now construct lighter versions suited to constrained landscapes. The same hormonal cascades that governed extensive growth now calibrate more modest forms. Within living creatures, the past persists, not as spectacle but as architecture. A penguin's dense bones, a wombat's reinforced jaw, a deer's seasonal antlers, all reflect histories of greater amplitude. Modern scale may appear diminished, yet beneath fur, feather, and skin lies a lineage that has traversed expanses of size and climate. The memory of mass remains encoded in structure and sequence, carried forward in bodies refined for the world as it is now. A vast body alters perception before it alters danger. When something towers above ordinary scale, the mind registers the difference instantly, even before conscious thought forms. Across human cultures and eras, beings of extraordinary size have occupied mythology, art, and collective imagination. Giants inspire reverence and caution in equal measure, not only because of physical power, but because scale itself reshapes cognitive experience. Neuroscience offers insight into this response. The human brain rapidly assesses relative size as a measure of potential threat. Structures such as the amygdala engage when confronted with stimuli that exceed familiar dimensions, signaling heightened attention. Larger forms command more visual field, obscure more horizon, and imply greater force if movement occurs. From an evolutionary perspective, sensitivity to size would have provided clear survival value. Recognizing and reacting to large predators or rival groups required swift processing. Yet, alongside vigilance arises awe. Studies examining psychological responses to vast landscapes or monumental architecture reveal overlapping neural pathways associated with both fear and admiration. Awe tends to emerge when scale exceeds expectation while lacking immediate hostility. The same reaction that once kept early humans alert before massive animals may have evolved into a capacity for wonder in safer contexts. The mind expands perceptually when confronted with enormity, recalibrating internal measures of self and environment. Throughout prehistory, encounters with megafauna would have reinforced this dual sensation. Large herbivores grazing across plains or immense predators emerging from shadow embodied both opportunity and risk. Successful hunting required coordination against formidable bodies, while failure could be fatal. The memory of such encounters likely shaped stories and symbols passed through generations, embedding giants within cultural memory long after many species vanished. Modern humans rarely share landscapes with creatures approaching Ice Age mass, yet the psychological imprint remains. Even today, the sight of a whale breaching offshore or an elephant striding across savanna evokes a blend of humility and respect. Scale reduces the human frame by comparison, reminding observers of forces beyond individual control. This response is not purely emotional. It reflects cognitive systems honed in environments where size correlated strongly with consequence. The shrinking of terrestrial giants may therefore alter more than ecosystems. As large animals decline in presence and abundance, opportunities for direct encounters with monumental scale diminish. Still, the brain retains its wiring. Awe arises before mountain ranges, towering forests, or expansive skies, each stimulus echoing ancient calibrations of proportion. Size carries psychological weight alongside physical mass. Within neural circuits shaped by deep history, magnitude continues to trigger attention, caution, and quiet admiration, lingering traces of a time when immense bodies shaped both survival and story. Beneath layers of sandstone and shale, the past is preserved unevenly. Not every creature that lived left a trace, and not every trace endured the pressures of burial, uplift, erosion, and time. The fossil record is a partial archive, shaped as much by absence as by discovery. Within its gaps lie entire populations that moved, fed, and reproduced without leaving behind bones hardened into stone. Fossilization requires rare alignment. A body must be buried quickly enough to avoid scavengers and decay. Sediment must accumulate in protective layers. Groundwater chemistry must favor mineral replacement rather than dissolution. Environments such as river deltas, lake beds, and shallow seas tend to preserve remains more readily than upland forests or open plains. As a result, the species known to science reflect where conditions favored preservation rather than a complete census of ancient life. Soft tissues vanish with particular ease. Fur, feathers, skin, and internal organs decay long before mineralization can occur. Only under exceptional circumstances, such as rapid burial in fine sediment or preservation in permafrost, do these delicate features endure. Even then, the record is fragmentary. A single bone may represent a lineage once widespread, its geographic and ecological range inferred from scarce data. Large animals, though more likely to leave durable bones, are not guaranteed immortality in stone. Scavenging can disperse skeletons before burial, and tectonic forces can later destroy deposits that once held remains. Erosion exposes fossils slowly, and countless specimens crumble unnoticed. What emerges into museums and collections represents a filtered sample dependent on both ancient conditions and modern chance. Advances in technology continue to soften these silences. Ancient DNA extracted from sediments can reveal species that left no visible bones. Isotopic analysis reconstructs diets and climates from subtle chemical signatures. High resolution imaging uncovers microfossils once overlooked. Each discovery reshapes understanding, suggesting that present knowledge is provisional rather than complete. Yet, even with these tools, uncertainty endures. There were ecosystems, interactions, and transitional forms that may never be fully known. Some species shrank or vanished without leaving clear markers. Others may have existed only briefly between climatic pulses, too ephemeral to fossilize abundantly. The fossil record offers structure but not fullness. It outlines trends in size, extinction, and adaptation while leaving room for humility. Between layers of rock and fragments of bone lies space for lives unrecorded. In that quiet space, the history of giants includes not only those measured in museums, but also those known only through inference, their presence suggested by patterns that emerge from the fragments that remain. History suggests that scale expands and contracts with the chemistry of air and the rhythm of climate. The question of whether giants could rise again does not belong to myth, but to physics, biology, and time measured far beyond human lifespans. Earth has cycled through warmer and cooler phases, through higher and lower concentrations of oxygen, through continents assembled and then torn apart. Each transformation has redrawn the boundaries within which bodies can grow. Atmospheric composition remains one of the quiet architects of size. If oxygen levels were to increase substantially over geological timescales, diffusion-based systems in certain organisms might once again support larger frames. Fossil evidence from distant eras shows that when atmospheric oxygen peaked, arthropods stretched beyond modern limits. Yet such changes depend on complex feedback between vegetation, carbon burial, volcanic outgassing, and tectonic movement. These processes unfold across millions of years, not generations. Climate exerts similar influence. Prolonged cooling periods favor mass on land by enhancing heat retention and stabilizing certain ecosystems. Extended warming, if gradual and accompanied by abundant productivity rather than volatility, could in theory support expansion in marine environments where buoyancy eases structural demands. The rise of enormous whales demonstrates that under favorable oceanic conditions, magnitude remains biologically possible. Still, speculation must remain tethered to ecological context. Size requires not only supportive air and climate, but intact food webs and expansive habitats. Fragmented landscapes, rapid environmental change, and persistent human modification limit the likelihood that terrestrial ecosystems will soon return to conditions that favored Ice Age mass. Even if atmospheric and climatic variables aligned, large land animals would require uninterrupted territories and stable resource flows to expand significantly. Evolution responds to opportunity, yet it also works within constraints imposed by prior transformations. The current configuration of continents, ocean circulation, and biosphere composition differs from earlier eras when giants flourished widely. While future geological epochs may bring new arrangements, Predicting exact outcomes remains uncertain. Across deep time, no trait persists unaltered. Size has surged when energy, abundance, atmospheric chemistry, and habitat continuity converged. It has receded when those foundations fractured. The potential for giants remains embedded within evolutionary possibility, encoded in developmental pathways and ecological theory. Whether those pathways will again widen depends upon forces far larger than any single species. In contemplating return, one encounters not inevitability, but conditional probability. The planet has held vast bodies before. It may do so again under circumstances that align with the ancient equations of mass, energy, and stability that have always governed the scale of life. A body of great mass does not move lightly across a landscape. Every step presses into soil, bends stems, opens pathways through brush. In life, giants were not merely inhabitants of ecosystems, they were architects within them, shaping vegetation patterns through appetite and movement. Their influence extended beyond their own survival, altering the structure and diversity of plant communities over vast regions. Large herbivores consumed enormous quantities of foliage, trimming grasses and browsing shrubs in ways that prevented any single species from dominating unchecked. By reducing dense growth in certain areas, they created mosaics of open ground and regrowth. Sunlight reached seedlings that might otherwise have been shaded out. Nutrients cycled through digestion and returned to soil in concentrated deposits, enriching patches that supported varied plant assemblages. Seed dispersal formed another subtle contribution. Many plants evolved fruits and seed structures suited to ingestion by sizable animals. Tough outer coatings protected embryos as they passed through digestive systems, emerging ready to germinate in fertilized ground far from the parent plant. Without these large carriers, some species experience reduced range expansion. Fossilized dung and pollen analysis suggest that megafauna transported seeds across distances that reshaped entire biomes, knitting together plant populations over wide territories. Movement patterns also engineered water flow and terrain. Herds following seasonal routes compacted soil into trails that redirected surface runoff. In floodplains, trampling could open channels and maintain wetlands by preventing woody encroachment. The physical disturbance caused by grazing and wallowing influenced successional stages of vegetation, maintaining grasslands that supported additional species. Even predators played indirect roles, shaping herbivore behavior and thereby altering where and how intensely plants were consumed. When many giants disappeared, ecosystems adjusted in their absence. Some grasslands transitioned toward denser forests as browsing pressure declined. In certain regions, plants previously dispersed by large animals became more localized. Ecologists studying rewilding initiatives observe that introducing or protecting large herbivores can restore heterogeneity in vegetation, suggesting that their historical role was foundational rather than incidental. The presence of immense bodies once acted as a regulating force, distributing energy and nutrients through physical interaction with land. Their size amplified their ecological footprint, not only in the literal imprint of tracks, but in the patterns of growth and regeneration that followed them. Without this influence, landscapes reorganized under new dynamics. Giants taught ecosystems through their scale. They demonstrated that magnitude carries responsibility within ecological networks, linking soil, plant, and predator in interconnected systems. Though many of those massive forms are gone, the environments they shaped continue to bear traces of their engineering, subtle contours in terrain, and vegetation that hint at the weight once carried across open ground. The world that remains feels lighter, quicker, more finely tuned to change. Across forests, grasslands, and coastlines, the dominant forms are no longer immense silhouettes against the horizon, but compact bodies that move with speed and reproduce with urgency. The inheritance left behind is not empty. It is adjusted, recalibrated toward efficiency rather than magnitude. Smaller animals tend to mature more rapidly. Their bones harden sooner, their reproductive cycles begin earlier, and litters or clutches are often larger relative to body mass. This compressed timeline allows populations to respond swiftly to shifting conditions. When drought alters vegetation or predators move into new regions, multiple generations may pass within a few years. Variation spreads quickly, and natural selection can refine traits at a pace that larger, slower species cannot match. Energy efficiency underlies this shift. A smaller body requires fewer calories each day. In fragmented habitats where resources fluctuate, this lower demand reduces risk. Individuals can survive on narrower foraging ranges and exploit diverse food sources. Omnivory becomes advantageous as diets expand beyond specialization. Flexibility in behavior accompanies metabolic modesty. Animals that climb, burrow, swim, or fly short distances gain access to microhabitats inaccessible to heavier frames. Adaptability extends beyond physiology. Many modern species exhibit behavioral plasticity, altering nesting sites, adjusting migration timing, or shifting activity patterns in response to human presence and climate variability. Urban environments, though artificial, have become habitats for birds, mammals, and insects that can tolerate noise, heat, and patchwork resources. Such adaptability does not imply ease. It reflects a life history tuned toward experimentation within constraint. The scaled down world also favors shorter lifespans paired with frequent reproduction. Mortality may be high, yet population turnover ensures continuity. In ecological systems characterized by unpredictability, this rhythm proves resilient. While giants once shaped vast territories through sheer presence, smaller organisms weave stability through numbers and versatility. Landscapes themselves mirror this transformation. Fields replace plains, highways intersect migration routes, and climate oscillates in ways that compress seasons. Within these altered spaces, the organisms most able to persist are those that require less and adapt more readily. Their survival strategy is not grandeur, but balance. The inheritance from a giant past is therefore not diminished, but redirected. Evolution has shifted emphasis from scale to agility, from dominance through mass to persistence through flexibility. The modern biosphere hums with motion, countless smaller lives interlocking in dense networks. In this lighter world, endurance arises from efficiency and rapid renewal, qualities that quietly sustain the fabric of life across changing ground. Beneath every meadow, every forest trail, every quiet shoreline, the ground carries weight that no longer walks above it. Compressed into stone and sediment lie the remnants of bodies that once pressed deeply into soil, bent branches beneath their reach, and altered rivers with their passing. The surface world feels proportioned to us now, scaled to our stride and shelter, yet the planet remembers a different balance. The animals moving through today's landscapes are not distant replacements, but descendants. Within their skeletons, subtle proportions echo older frameworks. The curve of a rib, the hinge of a joint, the arrangement of teeth all trace back through lineages that once occupied more space, consumed more energy, and cast longer shadows. Evolution rarely erases. It refines, trims, reshapes, carrying forward successful designs while adjusting scale to match circumstance. Shrinking was not surrender, it was recalibration. As climates shifted, as vegetation mosaics transformed, as oceans cooled or currents altered, survival favored bodies that could endure fluctuation rather than dominate stability. Reduced mass meant lower caloric demand, earlier maturity, quicker generational turnover. What appears diminished in size often represents an increase in resilience. The story is not of loss alone, but of negotiation between organism and environment. The world itself changed first. Atmospheric chemistry oscillated, continents drifted, ice advanced and retreated, and new species entered established communities. Each alteration rewrote the energetic ledger of ecosystems, where once abundance supported enormity, later conditions rewarded efficiency. Lineages that could adjust persisted, those that could not faded into sediment. Over immense spans of time, this selective pressure sculpted a biosphere lighter in frame yet dense in interaction. The giants are absent from open plains and shallow seas, but their presence is not erased. It lingers in genetic pathways conserved across epochs, in developmental blueprints capable of producing greater size under different constraints, in anatomical architectures inherited rather than reinvented. It rests most tangibly in fossil beds, where femurs thicker than tree trunks and skulls broad as doorways lie, mineralized and silent. These remains are not monuments to failure, they are chapters in an ongoing manuscript. To walk across modern ground is to move above layers of former magnitude. The soil holds impressions of earlier proportions, reminders that equilibrium is never permanent. Life expands when conditions allow and contracts when pressures demand, continuously tuning itself to planetary context. What surrounds us now is one configuration among many that Earth has sustained. The memory of mass endures quietly. In living creatures scaled for a variable world, in genetic codes shaped by ancient abundance, and in the stone beneath our feet, there persists evidence that this planet has supported larger forms before. The current balance is neither lesser nor greater, only different, another expression of life adjusting to a world that never remains the same.